everyone. And Patrick, I'm so happy to see you. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Van Hamer. This is Beltline to Broadway, and I'm with two of my favorite theater makers. I shouldn't play favorites, but I do. So Heather Strickland and Patrick Torres of Raleigh Little Theater, and we're going to talk about the new show opening this weekend, which I'm very excited about, The Velocity of Autumn. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. And welcome, guys. How are you?
Hanging in there. Thanks for having us, Lauren.
I'm doing okay.
Thank you for being here. And thank you, Patrick, for being here. I know it's the night before opening. You open tomorrow, right?
That's right.
Tomorrow.
That's right. Yes, tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Very exciting. Well, I'm seeing the show this weekend. I'm very excited about coming back inside to Raleigh Little Theater. And I want to talk about that. That's how we're going to start this conversation, talking about this is the first show in a long time. I thought it was the first show in over a year, but it's almost a year that you brought audiences back inside the building. So although you've done the outdoor shows in the amphitheater, which have been wonderful, and you did Beehive, talk to me about the level of preparation it takes to welcome audiences back in.
Yeah, it is way more than you would think, and certainly way more than perhaps we anticipated when we thought about bringing audiences back inside. We have been out in our amphitheater for most of the past over a year now. The one time that we were inside in 2020 was in December. We did This Wonderful Life. And that was, we only were selling 25 seats per show, and we're also offering that show virtually. So really it was very, very, very small houses. There's certainly challenges with producing outside. You have to worry about weather, and even on our outdoor amphitheater, we were thinking through what are the health and safety requirements that are out there. We were still distancing our audiences. We were still doing a paperless check-in, no programs, all digital programs. So then, when we started thinking about inside, you lose that piece about just the safety of being outside. We know that ventilation and being outside is certainly a big plus when it comes to living during this pandemic. And so, at first we were thinking we would sell about 50% of the house. So our Sutton Theatre usually seats just under 300. So that would have been about 150. And then, Patrick and I actually spent an afternoon in the theater, kind of looked at how could we distance 150 people. And we realized that we couldn't really get good distance with that. And so we made the decision to further reduce the capacity to selling only 100 seats per show. And of course, we're going to be requiring masks. We have made sure that there's extra cleaning of those spaces, both before and after performances. And, we're keeping all of the paperless check-in. We're still keeping our programs digital. And of course, our staff is fully vaccinated. We're making sure that our front of house folks are fully vaccinated, and our cast and crew.
Have you all done surveys? I know I was at Theater Raleigh a couple of weeks ago, maybe a few weeks ago now, for Fun Home. And at the beginning, during the curtain talk, Lauren was talking about how they surveyed audiences, and 94% of their audiences surveyed said that they were vaccinated. Have you done those kinds of surveys about your audiences as well?
We did. It was probably maybe a couple months ago now that we surveyed. And, the challenge with that is a couple months ago, the world felt different than it does right now. One of the very challenging things about this is that the world seems to change kind of on a weekly basis right now. So when we did that survey, we certainly heard our audience was saying, we're still not ready to be back indoors. We said, absolutely, strictly requiring masks, because masks weren't required at the moment that we were still doing that survey. This is how long ago it was. So they were certainly asking us to have masks be required, and we are seeing an increasing number of our audience asking for folks to be fully vaccinated or have presented a negative COVID test as they come into the theater. Also, the wonderful thing about this theater community is the local theaters are sharing those survey results with each other. So we were certainly sharing our survey results with some of the other theaters in the area, and Theater Raleigh was very gracious in sharing the results with us as well. So, all of the theaters are struggling with these challenges because, we are unqualified to do the jobs that we are doing right now. None of us are public health experts. It's not really the job I ever wanted to do. So, we're not only are we unqualified, but it's not our passion. It's not what we want to be doing. So trying to figure this out has been incredibly challenging. And also you're making decisions that people feel very emotional about, because it is their health, it is their safety, it is their mental health during this time that they still want to be out and enjoying theater. So how do we create a space where they can still enjoy theater, they can still escape and still grow and learn, but they also feel physically safe and healthy. So, it has just been something that I never thought that we would have to be always thinking about. And, the creation of the art is sometimes secondary to figuring these things out. And that can be heartbreaking, and that can be very hard to sit in, especially now that we've been doing it for a year and a half. So I'm grateful for our community partners that are so willing to share information with us and collaborate and, certainly talk about how they're thinking through this, as we are also struggling of how do we do this.
Absolutely. And I will say, I am a nervous ninny. I have some health anxiety. I always have prior to the pandemic. But aside from that, and this is why this show resonates with me so much. I have 2 elderly parents that I help care for. And I will say, returning to the theater, I have felt very safe. I feel like the local theaters are really taking every possible precaution. I've had some of our followers call me and reach out to me and message me about the safety of the theater. And I can only speak for myself, but as somebody who is vaccinated, caring for 2 elderly people who are also vaccinated, I feel very safe returning to the theater. So if you're nervous, I know the theaters are taking every precaution. So that's what I have to say about that. Stop messaging me, please. I do feel safe. And I was at Beehive. I loved Beehive. My husband loved Beehive. It was hard to keep everybody, it was hard to keep my husband from singing and dancing, which really nobody needs to see. What did you learn from producing the shows outside, especially with a show like Beehive, which has so many moving parts, so many costume changes, lots of cast, lots of crew? So what did you learn from those experiences out in the amphitheater that you're able to now bring inside the building?
Yeah, Patrick, I'll certainly take a stab at that, but I'd love your thoughts on that as well. I talked about sort of the logistics of just getting an audience into the space, and that's just one night and, one group of humans that you have to, and then when you start to think about the rehearsal process, and, that is often, about 6 weeks long, and it's a group of humans that you also have to think through the logistics of taking care of, that adds a whole other layer, because not only are you thinking through the rehearsal process and what do you have to put in place there, but you're also thinking about, like, what if something does happen, right? What if you are a week to opening and somebody does test positive for COVID? There is then a ripple effect through everything, including, potentially having to delay a show opening. So I think, what we have learned producing so much outside is how to stay really flexible. That has been so key, and how not to let it just become, anytime something does happen, to get so emotionally caught up in it that we can't just make the decisions that we need to make going forward. And, part of producing outside was also dealing with the weather around that too. So, not only were we navigating COVID, but we were also navigating, is it going to rain for this show? And so we were, constantly reevaluating, constantly having to figure out what was the right thing to do from a myriad of different directions. And so we've gotten really good at just being able to go, okay, now we're going in this direction. Oh, no, we're going in this direction now. And, we've almost got a system in place now where a decision will be made for one direction or another, and the entire staff at RLT sort of rallies around it, activates in the direction that they each need to activate in, and then we make the changes that we need to make. And we've been really fortunate that our casts, our crews, our audiences have been like, okay, we'll go this way with you now. I mean, it's really remarkable that the grace that is being shown as we just have to. It feels like we're changing something every single week.
And, so for people who maybe are only seeing the Broadway openings on the show or the Jimmy Fallon show, and they're seeing all this great news happening, the issues you're speaking to are hitting every theater, no matter large or small. Broadway, West End, Back to the Future has had to suspend performances because one of their principals has to quarantine for 10 days because of COVID. So it's an industry-wide thing. It's not the local theaters are not immune to it for sure, and neither are the big theaters. So it's something everybody's grappling with.
But I think too, Lauren,
yeah,
just to jump in there for a second. I mean, I hope that what we're learning as an industry is that we are theater by its nature is an art form that is about a celebration of humanity and humanity coming together to be creative. I hope that what we're learning through all this is that we can give more grace to people when they're tired, when they don't feel well, when they need a night off from rehearsal, that they don't become problems, they don't become high maintenance, that we just listen and that we just understand that people and bodies are unique, and the expression of those feelings and emotions, and also just health is important, and we should be listening to that and really trying to take better care of people. So I think that's another thing that I hope we're learning as an industry. And then I think the thing that's been reinforced at RLT is that we cannot do any of it without the volunteers. None of it. I mean, Beehive would not have happened if there hadn't been really dedicated people willing to put those masks on, get back there, change the costumes, change the lights, move the sound equipment every night in the heat, all that stuff. It was a reinforcement of how grateful I am that we have people who are willing to help us, even though it's a hard time. It's a hard time for folks.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought up the volunteers. This was something I was going to bring up later in the conversation, but we'll just go there now. The people who are welcoming people back in, the ushers, in a lot of the theaters that people are going back to are volunteers who are not health officials, but they're being tasked with mask mandates and social distancing and all of these things that they really didn't sign up for initially. So we all need to treat each other with patience and grace. So I'm so glad you brought that up, Patrick. I think it's so important. Let us talk about this is a two-hander show, so two people in the show, two-person show. Patrick, I'm curious, I saw a really humorous TikTok floating around on Facebook because I don't follow TikTok, but it was a Beauty and the Beast production, and it was the final scene of Beauty and the Beast, and they're professing their love for each other, but they are literally 8 feet apart and never coming close to each other. And it was kind of comical. Has COVID changed the way that you approach directing? When I saw a number, it was so brilliantly done, and because of the nature of that show, I really felt like whether you did it during a pandemic or not, the directing wouldn't change. But for a show like Velocity of Autumn, does your directing change to take into consideration some of the COVID factors?
That's a really great question, Lauren. I would say that primarily the way that I select shows has changed at the moment. It's been an interesting because, all of us in the theater world right now who operate kind of on a July to June fiscal year are in the middle of season planning for 22-23, if you can believe that. And it's really tricky to think about, like, what are we planning for? Are we planning for a return to some sense of normalcy? Are we planning, that it's still going to be time for COVID? Can we finally open up the Gaddy again, which is our small theater, which I miss so much?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're really, wrestling with all of these things. So I think show selection has changed. As a community theater, the first 6 years of my job, I was trying to pick shows with the biggest cast possible to have as much opportunity as possible. So COVID's changed the game in terms of, like, doing some smaller shows. We've been picking shows that don't have intermissions and things like that. So I think that's matter. But I think in the directing process, yes, I've been thinking about distancing. A number was created at a very different time in February. And so the gift here is that the cast is fully vaccinated. They weren't at the moment that we auditioned for this show. That wasn't a requirement because the world was looking much different. It just happens to be that both of them, both the actors in the show, agreed to reveal that information to us and to each other. And so we do have a little bit more leeway. And so, but I still I think that this show works because there is a lot of distance in between these two people, and in their relationship, there's a lot of distance. And so I do think about it. I do think about it when we're on stage. And I think some of the prettiest pictures are when there's distance in that room. And so we've been lucky that the text lends itself to that. But I will say the thing that has changed and was really changing even before the pandemic, but the pandemic has really, if we're looking for silver linings, which I think is important to do sometimes, one of the things that the pandemic and rehearsing during the pandemic has done is it is normalizing consent, right? Every day we have to consent to taking our masks off to rehearse. Every day we have to check in with each other about our comfort level. Every day that you're not feeling well. We've canceled like 3 or 4 rehearsals in this process because an actor's like, I've got a scratchy throat. I'm not worried about it, but, and we're like, we don't have to be here. We got it. We'll make it up. And so, like, this culture of consent and listening and being compassionate, and not, yes, there's an opening night coming, but not letting a sense of urgency overwhelm us has been a true gift. I think directing has changed in that way for me. And I think RLT as a culture, especially with Heather and her intimacy work, has really started to prioritize consent as an organization. And that feels really good.
I love that you said that, because I think this does there are issues of consent. And it's interesting, Heather, you were one of the very first interviews I did before you took this position, right when everything shut down, back 18, 19 months ago, however long that was. And we were talking about how the consent would change, how this culture of consent would change. So that is definitely a silver lining. I want, and I'm not sure about our audience, how much they understand this, but I do want to kind of bring it up. So theaters like Raleigh Little Theater are community theaters, and they don't fall under the same equity guidelines that a professional theater like a North Carolina theater or a DPAC would, for example, that's going to present the national tours. So how are you all making the decisions, because you don't have some, equity agency telling you this is what has to be done, this is how far everybody has to be. I know with the equity houses, it's like 10 feet from the stage and there's all these guidelines. You all don't fall under that. So walk me through the decision process of the safety protocols. Obviously you have the government mandates, but aside from that, what's the thought process?
Well, as a community theater, we've always tried very hard, because I think if we see as like one of the pieces of our mission is to give people an experience to prepare them for other experiences like in the professional world. So we have often, even before the pandemic, really looked at the equity guidelines as the pathway to how we operate. So an example of that people, just might not be aware of is in an equity rehearsal process, you have to either take a break for 5 minutes every hour or 10 minutes every hour and 20 minutes. And we have always adhered to that. We try to honor like the equity rest time, like more than 12 hours between rehearsals and things like that. So we have consistently tried to follow equity as kind of a benchmark for how actors should be treated. Now, of course, there's some things that equity does that we have not implemented, like having, a cot in everybody's dressing room for naps in between shows and things like that. There are some places where we've gone, well, we can't provide that, but we have really looked at the equity guidelines for how to remain safe here. We don't have a dedicated COVID safety officer. We've kind of all taken on that mantle here, but we are looking at all of those guidelines and procedures to inform the way that we practice here in this building. So I would say that we're doing our best to follow those same rules.
Thank you for that. And I did share, for people who are interested in some of the equity rules, I shared some links on a podcast episode, and when I repost this, I'll share the links that Equity sent to me. Again, so you guys stop messaging me and asking me these questions. I don't work for any of the theaters, but people seem to think that I know about all of this stuff, and I'm just a journalist, guys. just ask questions. Heather's just an executive director. She's not So let's talk about the Velocity of Autumn. I so am looking forward to this. One, because it's comedy. I need some funny in my life, but two, because I, like so many people my age, am in this position where I'm still caring for children, even though they're grown children, they're still children, and my parents and my aging parents. And so there's a really interesting dynamic. I often say the whole roles have been flipped and reversed. So talk to me about how this play speaks to that and how that plays, particularly post-pandemic, when so many of us have been separated from our aging relatives, aging adults.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super happy to talk about this play because it's very meaningful to me. I'm also interested in hearing some from Heather because she has a very different relationship to the play because she was an audience member a couple nights ago, and I've seen it a lot, and the role of the director is sometimes. I think when we've seen it as many times as we've seen it, it's hard to put yourself in the position of the audience. So I'm curious to what Heather would say. But yeah, I first encountered this play when I was still in Washington, D.C., 2013, 14. I didn't see the Arena Stage production who originated the play, but I did get my hands on a manuscript and read it at the time and thought like it was a really beautiful picture of human beings. And really, I liked the play. And now, that I'm older and now that I have walked with my family through my grandmother having Alzheimer's and, having to say goodbye to her and, just being in the process of like deciding at what moment do we move her into a care facility. And that story is surfacing again with my family. So when I was picking, when we were finalizing what this season would be, which, is the season that we canceled, but we needed to change some of the plays just because of safety and things like that. This play really, it just came right back to me because it is very personal right now. I feel like in many ways, and I don't really think I do this often. I always do plays, choose to direct plays that are really meaningful to me. But I think this one, I think is a bit of a love letter to my family who for now it feels like for, I don't know, almost 15, 20 years, we've had folks that were in, different states of health and what everything that means. And I think that, to your point, Lauren, this moment that we come to as we get older, for some of us, it's when we're younger, for some of us, it's when we're a little older, where we start having to care for our parents in a way that a parent would care for a child, and having to make decisions that are really, really difficult decisions to make. And I think that what's so beautiful about the play and why it's resonant with me, and particularly right now, is I think that we often see the world through our lens. So it's easy for me to identify with Chris in this story, who is the son, who has come to try to talk his mother into making a move and making a switch. It's really easy to identify with that character. But Alexandra, who is an 80-year-old artist who is starting to show signs of cognitive decline, the voicing and the things that come out of that character's mouth help me relate so much to the people that we are now trying to take care of, and just creates and I think it does what great theater does, right? Which is to say, look at the world through this other person's perspective and see if you can find compassion and empathy. It doesn't mean that you're going to change. It doesn't mean that she shouldn't move into a home, but it means that we need to hear that there's probably way more below the surface of anger or shame or whatever that's coming, that's making them say, I don't want to move yet. That we should listen to, we should relate to, and we should care about. So that doesn't sound like a comedy, I know, but when you really think about it, I think great plays do this too. The lives that we lead in these big moments can sometimes be really funny, because when emotion is that big and that raw, we say things, we do things, we act in ways that tend towards the ridiculous, and I think that the playwright Eric Coble did a really good job of creating a ridiculous circumstance to start the play with that reveals a true humanity. And I think, man, when a play can do that, I'm a fan. I want to be on the train. So I mean, those are my initials.
And the interesting thing about this play is it was translated and done in Spanish and went on tour in Spanish for 2.5 years. I know because my mom's family is Spanish. The dynamic of a Spanish family is a special thing, and the dynamics of a Spanish Jewish family are really funny and interesting. But does this play change depending on what language it's being presented in? I'm just curious because I thought that was kind of interesting.
That's a great question. I think that something that I have found to be true in my experience as a Latino person is that mothers are exceedingly important in the Latino community. And so I think that sometimes that is a little bit different because I think in other situations, like we focus on relationships with the father and how the father, like in a patriarchal society, means and represents so many things. And that is also true in the Latin community, but the Latin community also reveres motherhood and Saint Mary and Mother Mary and like in ways that really elevate the relationship between a son and a daughter. I'm sorry, a son and a mother, which is really represented in this play. So it doesn't surprise me that the play had success in the Spanish language and as it toured, because all characters are symbols, right? And the symbol of motherhood that exists in this play and the relationship to the son, I think, would be very resonant with a Latino community.
And I think, families are funny. Big decision making can be funny, big life decisions. And so I look forward to laughing because I'll be putting out my review, but I saw the saddest movie last night and I was like, we don't need this movie right now. We just don't. We need to laugh. We need some levity. Next month, you're opening the family series, which I also love. It's something that Raleigh Little Theater just does and does so well and consistently and accessibly, which I really appreciate. This will be back outside in the amphitheater. Will you be offering sensory-friendly performances? And will the precautions or guidelines for audiences change for the family series? For people coming to those family shows, what should they expect?
I'll let Heather talk about the precautions and guidelines. For Elephant and Piggy and all of the children's shows that have been outside, we have considered all of those sensory friendly. So every performance will be sensory friendly, and there will be folks there to help us. For anybody who has needs during the show that arise, we will have people that are volunteering specifically to help out in terms of the sensory friendly audience that shows up. And we do that because a lot of the times in the indoor theaters, we have special sensory friendly productions because lighting changes very quickly and it's much more contrasting in indoor than outdoor. Outdoor, we do these shows during the day, so there really isn't a lighting design. And we can also control sound, and sound dissipates more outdoors, of course. And there's just more space to move around. So we really feel confident. And the creative team all knows that every performance will be considered sensory friendly. So they're already thinking about it as they're building the show, which is really great. And I'll let Heather take over on guidelines.
Yeah, and we'll provide, just as we have done for the family series shows that have been out in the amphitheater, a guide to attending these shows. So that is a resource that will be available that sort of walks through, here are the ways that it is a sensory-friendly performance. We will be sticking with the same health and safety procedures that we have been doing out in the amphitheater. So we are continuing to limit sales to 300 per show, and that amphitheater seats close to 2,000. So there's plenty of room to spread out, and we will also continue seating every other row in those rows. So we're distancing, we are still limiting tickets. And there's still one entry, paperless entry. So we are sticking with the safety that we have found out in the amphitheater.
Is the social distance guidelines and the every other row, is that also for the movies in the garden? Because you got some good movies playing. I need to go to a movie.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, normally our movies are free and just sort of open to anyone that shows up, because we can't just open it up and have a giant crowd show up. We are doing a pay what you can for our movies in the garden, but that helps us make sure that we're putting a cap on the audience. So yes, the movies in the garden are also limited to 300, and we're doing the distancing. And coming up soon is Hocus Pocus, and folks are very excited about Hocus Pocus out in the amphitheater. We are seeing those tickets sell very quickly.
Yes. So lots of fun things. Camps and classes have started. So there's always something happening at RLT. 4 decades, I would say, RLT has been so committed to this community. And I would say arguably one of the preeminent community theaters in Raleigh for sure. How has COVID changed RLT's role, or even RLT's relationship within the community? Not just the artistic community, but the community at large, your audiences.
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely going to take both of us to answer this question, Patrick. I don't know. it's challenging for me to say because my relationship with the organization has changed during the pandemic. Certainly I was a volunteer here for many years, but then decided to step into this role of executive director during the pandemic. So for me, sort of from a very personal space, I don't know that it was that it changed, but perhaps sort of strengthened the resolve to focus on our community. Early on in the pandemic, Patrick and I, along with the staff, created sort of these guiding principles of how we were going to, we knew that we were going to have to make a lot of decisions coming into the pandemic. We had no idea what that would be. We had no idea that we'd still be doing it for a year and a half. But what we knew is that we were in a crisis situation where we were going to have to figure out how to make some probably pretty hard, pretty big decision. And so, we created some guiding principles that were going to help us sort of always put guardrails around what we were going to keep as our touchstones through this. And, certainly there was one about the long-term financial stability of the organization, but the rest of them were really rooted in the health and safety of our staff, our volunteers, and making sure that we were still providing meaningful experiences for our community. I don't think we fully understood what that was going to mean at the time that we said that, but how that sort of grew over the year was, okay, yes, we're doing virtual things. We can only include a few artists or a few volunteers, but how do we add a layer that involves our community in this? Patrick brilliantly planning a pandemic season, a beautiful example of that was the Midnight Dreary Festival that we did. So, we were doing radio dramas, which is not something that we normally did, but there was only a handful of artists and volunteers that could be involved in creating that. And so in addition to creating the radio dramas that we produced, we also put out to our community, hey, take Edgar Allan Poe's work and create your own piece of art. And then we will share it as a part of this festival through our social media channels. So that sort of commitment to thinking about, we still have to provide these opportunities for our community. We still have to connect with our community. We were hosting, we called them Chats with Heather and Patrick, just to have a space for our folks to come talk to us and understand how we were thinking about this and how we were thinking. So I think that it wasn't so much of a change because the community has always been central. The volunteers have always been central. They have always been the heart of what we do. I think it strengthened that and brought it into a focus of, even when we come out of the pandemic, we still have to always be thinking that way because, while that was hard and challenging to do through the pandemic, it provided a clarity of focus for us that probably, really helped us get through the pandemic because, once you sort of center that, I don't want to say that the decisions are easy at that moment, but they do become clearer on what is the right thing to do.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that what I would add, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to weigh in.
Oh, yeah. I think Heather talked about that beautifully. And I think that, the other thing that the pandemic has, the other opportunity that it's offered all of us, including RLT, but all of us as individuals, is to really address the other pandemic, right? Of racism and injustice that exists in the country. And I think that we've spent a lot of time as a staff working on our equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism efforts. That is ongoing work. It is never finished, but we are changing, and we are a different company coming out of whatever this moment is. We're a different company now than we were 2 years ago because we've took some space to be really intentional about how do we develop policies and procedures and a culture that is focused on justice. Now, and I think the thing that I want people to understand is that theater has always been about connecting human beings to other human beings. For me, as a person who has who is spiritual. Like, I really feel like theater allows me to meet characters and people that I have not had the experience. I have not had their life experience, and I can learn to be empathetic. I can learn to pray for folks who have gone through the experience of a character that I just witnessed that I never knew anything about. So theater is about humanity. Theater doesn't exist without people in a space together. And so for us, the work in anti-racism and equity, diversity, inclusion is fulfilling the mission of what theater is meant to be, which is to invite everybody to the table, to look at a group of characters and situations together, to learn from it, to grow from it, to become better neighbors. That includes conservative people. You know what I mean? Like, I just think, like, so many people think that us saying that is us saying we're taking a political stance in terms of like red and blue stance, right? It is a political stance in that it involves humanity and people, but it's not a red and blue stance. It's an opportunity to learn from each other and to grow and to see each other in a way that is healthy, that is just, and that moves us forward. And so, you know, I do think that it is changing the relationship we have with our community in a way that I hope is positive and more inviting and more inclusive. The first phrase of our mission statement is to be a welcoming space. And we cannot do that if we don't look at these policies and procedures. And if we don't adapt and change, there is no way to really live into that mission. So I want people to come with us. Some people might not, and we will bless them for the time that they spent here. But I do think that people are going to see a different RLT when they come back and volunteer, and when they are around us, because we, the board and the staff, have been very intentional about really thinking through how can we be better. RLT has a history of activism. You know, the third show that the theater ever did in its history required that a theater desegregate. You know what I mean? Like, it's who we are. And so we want everybody to be involved with that. And hopefully we can be a place of learning and healing. That's our goal.
I love that. And I've said many times on this platform, theater is my sanctuary for exactly that reason. And I love what you're speaking to, Patrick, because I think we have grown into this acceptance of a cancel culture. You know, if something doesn't vibe with us or we don't agree with something, and there's a lot of things I don't agree with out there right now, but it's really easy to cancel them out. And I think what you're speaking to is calling people in, and that's what I love about the theater, is that it calls people in a way that doesn't feel threatening. It feels safe. So I hope everybody will go to the theater and see this show and see all the shows and support all the local theaters that are doing such good work. I guess Broadway is back again for the third time in 3 weeks. I'm very happy Broadway is back. Okay. And full disclosure, I'm going to New York in 2 weeks and I'm seeing Broadway shows, and nothing makes me happier than seeing shows, whether it's on a local stage or a Broadway stage. I'm there. I don't care. I'll watch my kids perform at this point. I just love theater. But as theaters reopen, I think that a couple of things are lost or maybe taken for granted, and one of those things being the financial impact that COVID has had on all of our theaters. I don't want people to get complacent just because doors are open, just because tickets are selling. I mean, Heather and Patrick just told you they're only selling a third of the tickets that are possible in the Cantey Theater for this show. Can you both speak about the financial impact COVID has had on RLT and what you need audiences to do and to continue to do? Because it was easy to support theaters when theaters were closed because there was nothing happening. But now that there's things happening, the theater still need our support more so than ever. So could you speak to the state of the state of the union, the state of the theater at this point?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in all the ways, it has been a pretty devastating year for us, for any theater, for anyone that is dependent on people gathering. It has been a very, very challenging year, and it was probably just over a year ago that we were laying off staff. Our staff capacity was greatly reduced. Things have, of course, started to get better. And there was a lot of public programs that are helping theaters survive and start to rebuild back. And we're very fortunate in many ways. But what has become very apparent is that we are in this for the long haul. This isn't something that we're going to be done with at the end of this season, potentially even next season. We've got to really rethink how we do a lot of things. And that's not just related to COVID and the health. I think it's also related to the other pandemic that Patrick mentioned about, the race and anti-racism. We've got a lot of things that we've got to pull apart and figure out how to put back together because it hasn't been right for everyone. And so that work, it's going to take time, it's going to take commitment, it's going to take a lot of heart, and it is going to take resources. And so, not only do we need support now and to continue to be a part of our community, we're going to need it to help us figure out the challenges in front of us, the changes that we're going to go through, the transition that needs to happen, that must happen. So it's not only important to financially support these organizations, it's important to keep showing up for these organizations and to keep high-fiving the theater workers because we're going to be going through it for a while.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, I don't know how to add anything to that. Even just like a good job and a high five does sound amazing. I mean, there's so much decision fatigue. And I would just remind people the opportunity afforded by theater in general, if you feel safe, is to connect with other people in the same space. That's the opportunity. It's always afforded. That's the reason that is so central to who we are as people. And we don't want to lose that. I think, there's so much great technology in the world that makes us feel connected. But, the person-to-person connection, I hope this time apart has reminded us how important and critical that is. And it's worth supporting and worth investing in. And my goodness, if you live in the Triangle, I have to say, I don't know if people know, it is bananas how much rich cultural activity you have at your fingertips if you live here. It is probably one of the most abundant in the country, doing really good work on all levels. And if you haven't been to other theaters and our theater, gosh, you got to go. Or in the museums and it is bananas how much we have around here. So if you're not taking advantage of that, you're missing out on the communities you live in because it's remarkable.
And I will say,
I will just add one more thought, Lauren. We're gonna need our storytellers. Right? Storytellers are critical to every single society. They are critical to understanding who we are, who we were. And, what's going to happen, not only do we need theater to help us heal, but we need the storytellers to capture this moment, to capture not only exactly what happened during this moment, but to capture all the emotions of this moment and to be able to reflect it back to individuals, to policymakers, because the storytellers really are the ones that end up influencing policy change and structural change and public funding, because, for as much as I would love for all of our laws to be made on data-driven decision, they're not. They are based on, much more of the qualitative understanding of what is needed in our communities. And our theaters and our arts scene, they're going to be so important to helping us all process what the hell we've just been through and what is needed to make sure that we continue to heal, and to also help make sure that maybe we put some things in place to make sure that none of this is as hard as it should be next time.
I love that. Well, thank you both for this. And as you're, I think if you're a theater lover right now, a lot of our social media feeds are being flooded with Broadway stuff. And I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love turning on the television and seeing these Broadway performances. I really do. But I'm also reminded that every one of these performers on Broadway stage started out on a community theater stage somewhere, whether it was in their high school or whether it was at a theater like Raleigh Little Theater. And I always think about Rob Marnell, because when I interviewed them and his wife, who my brain is totally frozen right now, from Wicked,
Laurel.
I had posted a field trip Friday of Raleigh Little Theater, and Rob commented on it and was like, that's where we got our start. That's where we met. We met at Cinderella. And so it's really important to support those performers as they're at the beginning of their careers, not when they just hit those pinnacles. But yes, Patrick, to your point, we have such rich culture here. Moses is on here from North Carolina Museum of Art. The American Dance Festival is happening there now. Thank you, Laurel Harris. Johanna is watching the National Women's Theater Festival is based here. Maya is watching North Carolina Theaters doing some great work. So we're really lucky in this area. So just go and support local theater. I've been to a lot of the theaters we're talking about, including Raleigh Little Theater, and have felt very safe. So take your mask, get vaccinated, and go to the theater. that's
Lauren,
my PSA for the day.
We can't go without giving Heather the opportunity to tell me how good I did at Velocity of Autumn.
Oh, yes.
I'm
So all right, Heather. You put on your theater critic hat. How did you do?
Yeah, it is a gorgeous show. Patrick and the whole team have done an amazing job. That it is such a show that is based in relationships, and the relationship between this mother and son is real. And, Lauren, you're absolutely right, especially for any of those of us that are in that point in our life where, yes, we might be taking care of children, but we're also starting to think about taking care of our parents. Actually, really, it's anyone that has to take care of someone else, and what that means. And also the funny thing that does happen to family, of where there's moments in our journey with our families where we can be really, really, really far apart from each other. But when it matters, when it really matters, we are always right there for each other, whether it's hard, whether it's ridiculous, whether it is exactly what we need.
Well, RaleighLittleTheater.org, RLT just posted. There's only 2 tickets left for tomorrow night's opening night performance. The show runs from this weekend through October 3rd. Check out RaleighLittleTheater.org for tickets, not just to this production, but to the family series, which kicks off next month. Thank you both for being here with me. I always enjoy chatting with both of you, and I will see it Saturday night. I can't wait to laugh because we need laughter right now. We need these stories. So thank you. And thank you all for watching. If you tuned in late, this will live on Facebook. You can watch it from the beginning. It'll be posted on our website, and then I will be extracting the audio, and that will be on the podcast this weekend. So you have lots of ways to access it. and break legs. Break legs on the opening night. I was going to say good luck, but no good luck. Just break legs.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all for watching. And I will see you next week. We have 2 events next week. Tuesday, we're going to have a talk chat with some local theaters that have not reopened yet to talk about what reopening looks like for some of our theaters that are still struggling. And we're going to have our community coloring night Wednesday night with Coloring Broadway. This month's theme is Come From Away. So if you like coloring and you love Come From Away as much as Andrea and I do, Andrea runs Coloring Broadway. Please join us. It's a great chance. We're getting big now. We have people from all over the world coloring with us, and it's really fun. So thank you both. Thank everyone for watching, and I will see you soon at the theater.
Thanks, Lauren.